Welcome. Today is January 26th, 2023. My name is Stephen Payne. I'm the director of the Bronx County Historical Society, and I'm really thrilled to be here with Al Zucker. We're also here with Baba Antonio Mondesire Cabrera, who will be contributing and asking some questions. And before we get into Al's family history and background, Al has a poem about the Bronx. So Al, why don't you go ahead and read the poem, and then
Okay.
we'll get started after that.
I remember the Bronx of my childhood, faces and sweetness, and bitter cold places beneath tenement stairs. I remember trains roaring, screeching through the borough's iron spine. I remember stoops and games, golden afternoons of Ringalivio and running feet, the taste of kishka in the corner deli that somehow became pernil con yuca. I remember music and drums and dancers moving with passion and grace. And on the street, my stepmother, the pavement hugging me in warm embrace, and on each street another mother, and much, much love.
Thank you, Al. What a beautiful poem.
Thank you. It's funny talking about drums, music. As a little boy, about 4 years old, my aunt and uncle lived on 163rd and Ho,
Mm.
and not too far from them, one was sort of like the Black Cuban enclave up near Avenue St. John near Prospect, and the other of these, and not too far from them lived Arsenio Rodriguez and his crew.
Ah,
As a little
yes.
boy, I'm walking in the street with my aunt and my cousin, and I see this big, I mean, not very tall, but quite heavy, very loud and garrulous Black Cuban with his entourage. He was blind.
Yeah,
And I asked my aunt, who's that? And she didn't know.
yeah.
But years later, I figured out who it was.
That's amazing.
It was Arsenio Rodriguez.
That's amazing. I knew he lived in the Bronx.
Yes.
But I've never
I believe he was on
heard
Beck
exactly
Street.
where. Okay.
He
Wow.
lived in other places too.
Yeah, sure. Wow, that's an amazing
And
amazing
he
story.
came in the fifth. He didn't come because he came a couple of years, a bunch of years before the revolution.
Yeah, sure.
He came actually looking for he wanted his site restored,
Yeah.
and much later on, a new innovative technique was developed, a surgical technique, which the doctors felt would restore his sight. Problem was, by then he had become a Jehovah's Witness,
Mm.
and the surgery, there was a possibility that he might need a blood transfusion. So he didn't go for it.
That's too bad.
And that was too bad. And he actually died in L.A. not too long afterwards.
Wow.
But
Wow. That's an amazing story to start out with, and I know that music is such a large part of your life as well. And before we get more into that, why don't you just share a little bit about your family's history and background,
sure.
and how they ended up in the Bronx, whatever you know about all of that backstory.
No, my mother and her younger sister were born in Romania. Her older sister was born back in the village in Russia. They never identified as Ukrainians. They were
Sure.
very proud to be Rus, to be Russian.
Yeah.
Her brother, the youngest one, was actually born in Brooklyn on Alabama Avenue,
Okay.
and all of them except my mother was born in Galati, Romania. Our younger sister was actually born in Bucharest, the capital.
Okay.
The only one born in a hospital.
Wow.
Everybody else was born. What they would do was on the kitchen table because it was more stable than the bed.
Sure.
With a midwife.
Yeah.
And mean, now that site. Well, my grandfather was drafted into the Tsar's army in 1914,
Sure.
and he was a cavalryman. Uh, sort of a lot of combat, I guess, against the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians. And after the Russian Revolution, the men in the unit got rid of their offices,
Yeah.
and this now became a Red Army unit. And there was more combat, and in a battle with a force of the whites, the right wingers, the unit was wiped out.
Wow.
My grandfather survived by crawling under a dead horse,
Oh my God.
and by some incredible fortune, he found his own horse with his own, gear, and he rode hundreds of miles back to his wife's village, where she was with the baby, my aunt, the oldest child.
Yeah.
And at that point, the whites were conducting massive massacres and pogroms of the Jews.
Yep.
In that area. And he grabbed his wife and his daughter, and he took off. This is insane. He took off many, many hundreds of miles and almost got killed crossing the border to Romania. And my mother was born in the port of Galati, Romania, where he actually was working on the docks for a while. But then they had some family that had preceded him. They were in the capital, and he made it to Bucharest. He worked in a factory, and he had one more daughter. And his older brother was living in London and wanted him to come to London. So they made their way across Europe to Germany, and his older brother was able to send some money, and they took a boat to London. But by this time, my grandfather was smitten with the dream of the golden Medina, the golden land.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he didn't want to stay in London, and so his brother gave them money to take a ship to New York. Of course, when they got to New York, it was about 1924. I think they got it just before the change in the immigration quotas.
Okay.
Until like 40 or 41, they lived, in really dire poverty.
Yeah. Yeah.
What took them out of poverty was the Second World War,
Sure.
where everybody suddenly could work in a defense plant or defense related factory with unions, with benefits.
Yeah.
With pension, with medical plan, with double time for all of it. And you could, in those days in the war production, you could work like 20 hours a day if you wanted to.
Yeah.
And that's what propelled them out of absolutely dire poverty.
Yeah.
And then they landed, from Brooklyn to the South Bronx, to Nelson Avenue in the West Bronx, and to Jessup Place up on the hill, which none of these buildings are there anymore.
Yeah.
And shortly before moving to Co-op City, my grandfather, it was a couple of years, my grandfather died, and my grandmother remarried at the age of 71.
Wow.
And they moved to Co-op City, and her second husband died, and I moved in with my grandmother, and for a little bit, but I couldn't, she had reached a point. She was lucid.
Yeah.
But she had reached a point where physically she had no control. So she went across the street to the Hebrew home, which was at those days a very nice place.
Yeah.
And she enjoyed it. She was singing for people, and unfortunately, she died a month later. And I'm still in her. It's my apartment now, since 1989. My father's family is interesting. his mother was born in Romania. Uh, and my father's father was born in a village sort of in between Poland and Ukraine, because those boundaries shifted.
Sure.
And his village was predominantly Jewish. And they were a very interesting group of people because there were several places in Eastern Europe and Poland and Ukraine and Russia and Lithuania where there were families or villages where people of the migration from Andalusia, from Spain.
Mm.
And in that village, they had great. I mean, they had lost, language and so forth.
Sure.
They spoke Yiddish, but certain foods they made, and I had one of their sidduras, one of their prayer books, and it was basically an old Sephardic liturgy.
Wow.
And my father was not really into it that much, but what happened was years later, before he met my mother, he was dating an Algerian woman, Jewish woman, and very pretty. My mother, by the way, was gorgeous.
Yes.
As a young woman. But there was some little bit of controversy in the family. She's really an Arab, or no, she's really a Puerto Rican.
Yeah.
And so the Sephardic faction said, F you.
Yeah.
How dare you?
Yeah.
She's one of us.
Yeah.
And they were very accepting of her. I mean, ultimately, they eventually parted, and then he met my mother, and which I guess is fortunate because as a result of that, I'm here.
Yeah.
And my pop worked in the post office. He was a World War II veteran. This was an immigrant working class milieu.
Sure.
And people that had emerged from bitter, poverty, like not having enough food type of poverty.
Yeah.
And my father had a habit that he would, with his finger, he would lift poppy seeds when he, ate some kind of bagel or bread.
Yeah.
And I picked up on, he tried to stop me. But years later in Brazil, people saw me doing that. That was something that the really poor people from the Nordeste, from the interior did.
Yeah.
And they were pretty shocked to see me doing that.
Wow.
But that was a carryover of I stopped. I don't do that anymore. I've learned some manners. I learned some manners. So all my wives were upset with me about that. And, Brazilians are interesting because they have a whole thing with table manners and etiquette. That's actually very important to them.
Sure. Sure.
So,
so as far as your maternal grandfather goes, what was he a part of? Did he continue to work in factories after World War II?
Yeah. I mean, because he was a carpenter.
Okay.
And because of his politics, he was, shit-listed, let's say.
Of course. I was wondering about that.
And it's interesting that he, I remember he had the Yiddish paper, the Morgan Journal, which was very conservative, and it was physically a large paper, almost like the Times. So what he would slip into his copy of the Morgan Journal was his copy of the communist paper, the Freiheit.
The Freiheit, yeah.
And he was a character. I mean, he was a horse, he was short but very strong.
Yeah.
He was almost bow-legged from being a cavalryman.
Sure.
And he was, Grandpa, God bless him, was something of a player.
Yeah.
He died at the age of 73. He was with one of his girlfriends. the woman was very upset. And of course, my grandmother was, but he
Sure.
went out with a smile on his face. He was a wonderful man. My grandmother was. They were just wonderful, wonderful people.
Yeah, yeah. And did your grandmother did she was she working during World War II? Was she working after World War
Yeah,
II?
she working before and
Before,
she
during, after.
worked in factories, but also she was a cook and a seamstress.
Sure.
A marvelous, marvelous seamstress and a marvelous cook.
Yeah.
Uh,
What about on your father's side of the family? Did you know your grandparents very well on your father's side?
no, because my paternal grandfather died in 1953. I was about 55.
Okay.
My maternal grandmother died in 56 or 57. I was a baby.
I see.
It was interesting that my parents got married, and shortly after that, my paternal grandfather passed away.
Yeah.
And then my mother got pregnant, and she lost the baby. And then, in an insanely short period of time, I think less than 2 months, she was pregnant again, which was amazing.
Wow.
And my paternal grandmother was very, very concerned because my mother had lost the baby and suddenly she's pregnant.
Yeah.
So she made an amulet for my mother,
Yeah.
which my mother furiously refused to wear. She told my grandmother, "Well, I mean, what do you know? You can't read, you can't write, you don't speak English. Sometimes in summer you walk around with no shoes." But I mean, both my grandmas were and people of extraordinary knowledge of many, many things. And
Yes.
who knows? Maybe my life would have been easier if my mother had worn the amulet. But I guess I had a life generously filled with the slings and arrows of outrageous bloody fortune.
So that pregnancy was you then?
Yeah,
Is
that was
right?
me.
And then
I came out feet first.
You have a younger brother.
I have a younger brother,
right?
yes.
And is that
Who lives
it?
in Manila.
Oh,
Lived there
wow.
for many years.
Okay. Wow. And when you were born, which part of the Bronx did your family live in at that point?
I think we were on Fulton.
Oh, okay.
We were on Fulton.
And is
Then
that
we moved around. We landed up on Townsend, then on Walton, then in Co-op. It's typical Bronx hegira,
Sure.
We landed up in Co-op City.
Sure. And when you landed up in Co-op City, you were like 15?
Like 14,
16?
I
Oh,
think.
14?
Yeah,
15,
14.
okay, I see. So
13 or 14.
13, 14. So what about elementary school? Which PS did you go to?
The last one I went to was PS 79
But I guess a few, right?
on
Kind of-
Morris, and which was also had a junior, and I went to junior high school there.
Oh, okay. I got you.
But just getting back to my grandmother for a moment, turn to music. My grandmother had an extraordinary repertoire of Yiddish music, of both traditional stuff and both the Shalom Sekunda pop,
Sure.
and of Russian music and some Ukrainian music. And then she has some gypsy friends that she picked up some stuff from. She lived in Romania for a couple of years. She picked up a couple of things there.
Wow.
And she could really sing. She really sings. So I listened to her as a little kid. My grandmother, her father died when she was young, which plunged the family into really dire poverty. So at one point, there were some cousins that lived far away to the south in a city called Kishinev, which at that time was the center of the Russian tobacco industry. And they were working as in the cigarette factory or as tabaqueros.
Sure.
So they sent for the little girl. And so she went and She was happy working in the cigarette factory. And when she finished work every day, she'd walk home and she would pass a cafe that was the sort of the hangout for the bohemian set, the intelligentsia, the bohemian set. And they'd see this pretty little girl with a beautiful voice walking past every day singing. So they arranged for her to give a concert with a hall and everything. It was a big success. But when word got back to my great grandmother back in the village, she was horrified. A woman goes on stage and sings, that means she's a kurva, a nafka. She have to be a whore to do that.
Yeah.
So she made my mother come back to the village.
Wow.
With the next job, after that she got a job. They were really, really desperate. She was the worked as a maid to the priest, the Orthodox,
Yeah, sure.
And his wife was a very nice lady. Taught my grandmother to read and write Russian, and my grandmother had already learned to read and write Yiddish.
Yeah.
Some letters from her, which we used to call that she was writing in Hanglish. They were at times pretty hilarious, but she was a very remarkable person.
Sure.
So I mean, here I had this exposure. That kept me sane to all kinds of music. You turned on the radio. Until about 61 or 62, you could still hear music from Cuba.
Wow.
Yeah.
And the music in New York with Machito and Tito Puente, young Eddie Palmieri, was just Charango, was just astounding.
Yes.
And then you would put on the radio to hear R&B, and I mean, for a while I was staying with my aunt, and my mother's brother married an Irish American woman, and they lived in an old house down by it. It's where Lincoln Hospital is now.
Oh, okay.
And one day I was there. I went for a walk, and I heard a man playing fiddle, like a traditional Irish, sitting on his porch, playing traditional, Irish fiddle.
Yeah.
I mean, so we had these Armenian neighbors. And I used to walk all over. I walked to the Sephardic synagogue off on 169th Street, and where the Chazan Leon Pessah was a master. The cantor was a master singer of Ottoman Turkish classical music.
Wow.
And some of the men in the congregation were very much enthusiasts of Turkish and Arabic music. I remember when the great Armenian oud player Udi Hrant visited New York. It was a stir. I mean, I was too young. I wasn't going to go with them. But they went to see him play. And I mean, I began seeing people playing drums and dancing. And then later on the Tina Omnibus, I met this character. Him and a friend of his were playing incredible rhythms on the sliding pond.
Yeah.
And so I had all these wonderful. I mean, this was like my medicine.
Yeah.
This is what kept me sane. Was all of this music. I mean, years later, I actually worked for a while for the the old World Music Institute. But the Bronx, the music reflected the ethnic shifts.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard very, very good traditional Albanian music.
Sure.
An incredible drum called a tapan, and the davo, and something like a right. I don't know what word I could use in English for that. Very high pitched. But you also have in Cuban music what they call trompeta china.
Sí.
Okay.
You know, so many, so many things. I mean, you walk into some of the churches, and the gospel music was just rocking.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It was just rocking. With my first wife, I lived in Brooklyn. Her grandmother went to the one of her grandmothers went to the Brooklyn branch of Daddy Grace's church on Fulton Street.
Mm-hmm.
And just like the Daddy Grace Church in Harlem, the one on Fulton Street had incredible musicians.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, these guys could have backed up James Brown. You know,
Absolutely.
and I played music. I played piano.
Mm-hmm.
I played tenor sax for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I played trumpet. And I think I started in Westbury as a music major.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I started in Westbury as a music major
Yes.
under Ken McIntyre,
Mm-hmm.
SUNY Old Westbury.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't play music anymore. I write,
Sure.
but the music opened up the possibilities as to where I was going to land up in life.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Even in Co-op City, Tony played for a while with an incredible band called Cathedral
Oh my God.
with Paul Kimbrough.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
And they were hot. I mean, they were really something.
Wow.
And that was at Co-op City. Oh wow. Okay.
I forgot all about
Yeah, yeah. You didn't mention that. What kinds of things was Cathedral playing?
I think it was Latin rock.
It was like Latin rock, but they were better than, let's say, Seguida.
Yeah.
They were better some of the but you played with Seguida also for a minute,
Yeah,
right?
that's right. Latin percussion. Conga, bongo, little timbales.
Wow.
Wow.
So there was music. I mean, obviously in the churches there was gospel,
Sure.
with different things. Who lived in a couple of classical musicians? Who else lived in Co-op City? Very well known, Alnaje Allen Gums
Oh, okay,
lived in
okay.
Co-op City,
Yes, yes, yes.
Wow.
and famous timbalero, I forget his name, lived in Co-op City.
Played for Willie Colon.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
who was that? Timbalito was Louis Romero.
yeah. Luis Romero.
Oh,
So
okay.
there was music. Co-op City, went through these changes. It was It was predominantly Jewish. In the beginning, there were not too many Latinos, but there were always a significant amount of black people,
Sure. Sure.
which at one point, Co-op City's management wanted to see if they could shift them into the newly opened Section 5,
Yeah.
Remember that.
which
Yeah.
people were not too pleased with that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of the many things that led to the Great Red Strike.
Ah. Okay. Okay.
That was not the major cause.
Sure.
It
Sure. Sure. Just
It
one.
led to Great Red Strike, which was an incredible thing of unity, courage, and so forth.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, interesting because the United Housing Foundation, who came up with the idea, these old-time socialists and old-time anarchists,
Sure.
Mm.
Sure.
and they had Bluestone and Harold Ostrow's father.
right.
And Co-op City was a very progressive, in some ways a very progressive thing.
Yeah.
In some ways a very negative thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because it led to, tearing down the center of the Bronx.
Yeah.
Which was not necessary.
Yeah.
First it had been torn down by the Cross Bronx Expressway,
Right.
Yeah.
and then by Co-op City.
Yeah.
And so you had these transplanted West and South Bronx communities and recreated in Co-op City. All the synagogues were from other places in the Bronx. And you even had people coming into Co-op City, well, from Edenwald projects,
Sure. Sure.
and from Eastchester houses.
Yeah.
Even a little contingent coming in from the remaining Jews on Pennsylvania, Livonia Avenue in East New York.
Oh,
That's right.
okay. Wow.
But Co-op City, as a fundamentally Jewish community, only lasted a little bit more than 20 years.
Sure.
Yeah.
And you had white flight, and you had also the younger generation who had been to college, were making some money buying, buying their houses in Rockland, or
Yeah.
they used to call New City, Jew City.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when I go up to New City, I run into people I haven't seen in 50 years.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
You had the white flight. You had the older generation either going to Florida or dying.
Yeah, sure.
And the newcomers that came in were at that point African American,
Mhm.
with some Latinos. Latinos had a very strong organization. African Americans had an organization which did actually some very good and progressive things within the community. And Co-op City became what was a transition, primarily an African American community with a fairly large Latino population and a dwindling population of white people, mainly Jews. Co-op City, the people that are moving into Co-op City now are for people from Ghana.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
And people from Ghana. Also a lot of West Indians, but even more so people from Ghana.
Yeah.
And who are lovely folks.
Mhm.
Lovely folks. I'm glad to have them there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think the survival of the Bronx is partly due to the Mexicans to some extent, but even more so to the Africans.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The Senegal people and the Mali people,
Yeah.
and the Ghanaians and Nigerians, and even some Ethiopians and people from some other places.
Yes.
As a teacher, or as a plumber, I should have stayed a plumber. My first wife taught me into going back to school. But as a plumber, as a teacher, and what landed up was the best students were the African students.
Mm.
And one factor in that was because if you called home, things could be a little bit harsh for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's changing now, because now we're dealing second, third generation. They're influenced by American nonsense.
Right.
Sure.
So, but Co-op City has survived. It's become a very good and decent place to live in. It's a community.
Yes.
But I'm not there most of the year. Most of the year I'm in Bahia, Brazil.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I would not normally be here this time of year, winter.
Mm-hmm.
But I had some important things that I had to take care of.
Sure.
Yes.
And I really like Co-op City, but I like Bahia better.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to ask you a lot more about your time in Brazil. And before we get to that, though, why don't you describe a little bit about the early years in Co-op City, what it looked like, what your initial impressions were, kind of what the social scene
It was a mess, physically a mess.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We would have times we would play in these sand piles and jump off these sand, hills and stuff like that. The buses did not run all night.
Wow.
And my father was working on a night shift in the post office. So what him and his friends would do,
Mm-hmm.
they had certain strategic holes in the fence to New England. They would get off the train at Baychester Avenue
Yeah.
and walk, and walk across.
Mm-hmm.
In what is Garage 1, there was a supermarket.
Yep.
And the High Holy Day services were there in that area the first year that they had them.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And because, I mean, all the synagogues were transplants.
Yeah.
From elsewhere in the Bronx. There was a Catholic church, St. Michael's.
Yeah.
There was an Episcopalian church, and other churches, opened up, mainly in the African American community.
Sure.
It was so long ago. At that time, most of the Latinos in Co-op City were still Catholic. That's how long ago it was.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now Co-op City is is whole filled with various evangelical churches and some other churches
Sure.
and so forth. It's down to one synagogue.
Yeah.
In Section 5, which is kept alive by, they got some help from the Chabad, from the Lubavitch Hasidim, and that's what's kept that one synagogue alive.
Yeah.
One of the synagogues I went to was Sephardic Shari Achamim, which also was a transplant from, I think, 169th to 170th in Morris or Walton. And for years they had a wonderful rabbi who was an incredible chazan, incredible cantor. He was Moroccan. And Abraham Ben Chaim, fantastic. And there was a Sephardic community.
Yeah.
Old time folks speaking Ladino.
Yeah.
My next one name, and eating borecas and rosquitas de hueve and all these wonderful food. And in the old days, the coffee when you went there was good. I mean, and there was a wonderful rabbi in the largest Ashkenazi shul, Rabbi Burl, who passed away in 2018. And I've been in Brazil for quite a while, and I came back to New York, and shortly afterwards, he passed away, and they attempted to keep that synagogue going, and they couldn't keep it going. And what are you going to do?
Yeah.
What are you going to do? I mean, the population changed.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a whole influx at one point of Russians.
Sure.
Some of them are still there, but a lot of them, moved out, left out.
Sure.
Remember the Russians? Well, my grandparents. To them, New York City winter was a joke.
Yeah.
I mean, my grandfather, I was with him on the first day of snow in winter. So he opens his coat and opens his shirt and lets the snow hit his chest, and he beats his chest, and he goes in Russian and in English, good for the health. They were a hardy breed.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd have
my grandmother's borscht.
And as far as the rent strike in Co-op City goes, where were you in your life at that point? I guess you probably graduated high school by that point, right? Or maybe right on the verge.
Yeah.
But you were living in Co-op City, and what?
No, I wasn't living in Co-op City at that point.
Oh, I see.
I was in the midst of my first foray into quote unquote marital bliss. And I was living in Brooklyn.
Oh, okay.
At the corner of Brooklyn and St. Mark's, across the street from the Brooklyn Children's Museum, which is a wonderful place.
Okay.
And that block now is totally gentrified. I could not afford to,
Yeah, sure.
to live there. But I came to Co-op City and I saw what was, I was not at that point in my life some kind of active participant, but my father was.
Okay.
My father was. And then there was another thing she mentions in the book about the blackout.
Yeah.
And what happened during the blackout? I think I was still living in Co-op City. I was on the D train.
Yeah.
And on the train, I ran into a girl that I really liked. We're talking, and then the next stop, her roommate got on with with her boyfriend, and the train stopped in West 4th Street. We managed to get out of the train, and they knew that there were 4 exits out of West 4th Street station.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we walked all the way to the top, and it was early enough. We were lucky. We got a cab to their place in Brooklyn, and the next couple of days was a very enlightening, educational time in my life, to say the least. But so I mean, and I'm sure that being in Co-op City during the blackout.
Yeah. I imagine so. I imagine so.
But my father was involved in the rent strike. But what was really tragic was the heroic leader of the rent strike, Charlie Rosen.
Yeah.
Who was an old-time communist, and he was a printer.
Yeah.
I think it was for the Post. And the Communist Party had a print. They had different occupational sections. That printer section.
Sure.
Him and his father, and then he became part. The Progressive Labor Party, and he was a heroic leader. And the thing is that years later he became a total scoundrel.
Yeah.
I mean, really became nasty and ended up going to prison. It was really, really, really tragic.
Yeah.
But the Co-op City rent strike was real solidarity, but I think the problem was Co-op City's problems financially were New York City's problems.
Yeah.
That they were being raped by the banks and finance, insurance, real estate. And people had to compromise and had to find ways of surviving it. I mean, Co-op City was hampered by having a terrible management company for a number of years, Marion Scott. And Marion Scott posed as a minority business. Marion Scott himself, who was black, was just the figurehead for the folks that were really running the business. And Co-op City had some thieves on the board of directors, most notably Iris Hershkowitz Baez, who landed up in federal prison. But they eventually were thrown out, and Co-op City was able to revive and went through a period with gangs and crime, but it was never as severe as people were, were claiming.
Sure.
And then there was like some massive raids, and they threw out the drug dealers, and there were a bunch of people that were selling arms from apartments.
Oh wow.
And even a couple ladies turning tricks from their apartments.
Yeah.
Which is not an easy thing to do in a place like Co-op City.
Sure.
But Co-op City, went through some hard times, got a lot better, and is now quite a decent place to live. It's not as inexpensive as it was, but by New York City standards, it's an extraordinary bargain.
Yeah.
Yes.
Definitely.
One of the last people that working people with families can live.
That's right. So, do you want to talk some about your years as a plumber before the public school stories? I'm sure you have plenty of public school stories, but let's hear about you as a plumber first.
I mean, for years, I always worked, but I sort of, drifted from, I worked in factories, messenger, delivery, waiter, short order cook, and I really wanted to get into the apprenticeship of Local 3 electricians.
Yeah.
So I worked for some small non-union electrical contractors, and I couldn't get into Local 3, but my father had a friend in the Local 2. I got into the plumber's apprenticeship. And I went through and became a journeyman, and my first wife insisted that I return to school. Who needs an education? Come on. And plumbers are a highly skilled trade.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I could do many things.
And you get plenty of free time to pursue your own interest.
I became a good welder.
Wow.
pipe welder, which is quite a skill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was almost thinking of going to Alaska to work.
Oh, wow.
You know, I wanted to get my pipe welding skills to what are known as X-ray specifications, but I never quite reached that. And I went back to school, did different things. Eventually, and I worked for a software company for a number of years.
Oh, really?
I
Okay.
did sales and marketing, and fell through, and I became that degraded species known as a New York City public school teacher.
And which all schools did you teach in?
Well, I started in District 75 in Public School 10, which was a program for the severe to the profoundly mentally retarded.
Oh, okay. I see.
Which was very, very interesting. I mean, the whole school, only maybe 2-3 kids were verbal at all.
Yeah.
I had to learn a simplified sign language, but it was like an incredible education in the most basic form of communication.
Yeah.
Now, what the Department of Education did was they merged these very specialized environments, put them together in the same school, so you would have the size 7 that was known as inside kids who were extremely disturbed and at times violent in schools with the kids who were retarded or autistic. You know, it was really a nightmare what they did. But I taught about 5 years. I taught in elementary school, CS 61 in the South Bronx.
Yeah.
And then I taught for a little while in elementary school on the west side of 120th between Morningside and Manhattan, where I got into deep doo-doo with a horrible principal. And I ended up having to sue the Department of Education, get my job back. And then I landed up in a middle school for a couple of years, and that was the roughest.
Oh, okay, sure.
I mean, that is absolutely the roughest.
Yeah.
Then I was able to get out of it and get into high school, which is actually the easiest.
Yeah, definitely.
Really the easiest. I mean, in junior high school, what happened? And one kid, years ago, I used to come in every day with a pressed shirt and a tie, looking very professional. And I had a student, I'm not going to mention his name, this kid, big, tough, really genuinely tough kid. His mother had 11 kids by 7 different guys.
Yeah.
She was a very busy lady.
Yeah.
And for a joke, he tried to strangle me with my tie.
Oh.
And since, I had a somewhat low tolerance of the threshold of death,
Yeah.
I had to clip him in the head.
Yeah.
He went down bleeding. And fortunately, I had an adult witness in the room, because if I hadn't, I would have been in very serious trouble.
Yeah, sure.
Didn't matter, I was saving my life. And then a year or so later, I had I was the crisis intervention teacher for a while. But I remember I had to go into a classroom with a new young teacher and had a brutal crew.
Yeah.
And one kid was kicking another kid on the floor.
Yeah.
And I managed to get them separated, everybody seated, give out work, and chill out a little bit.
Yeah.
But the kid who was kicking the kid on the floor, who was a big kid, grabbed me from behind by my neck and slammed me down on my back on a computer table.
Wow.
So I was out for 8 months, I believe, line of duty disability.
Wow.
High school is actually a lot easier.
Yeah.
The kids are a little bit old, they're older, a little bit, have matured a bit.
Yeah.
They can be reasoned with.
Yeah.
Their hormones are not totally going
All over the place.
Yeah,
sure.
And even they were, some of these kids were having sex lives that you could only envy. So that would, cool off some of that.
Yeah,
Beat
for
it will drive. I remember when I was at Theodore Roosevelt, I had a student who came in midterm. She was an emergency safety transfer from another high school.
Yeah.
Very, very pretty girl, very shapely, half Puerto Rican, half Dominican. And she'd come in with these low-cut blouses or short skirts, and of course that would attract quite an amount of attention from the boys in the class.
Yeah.
Make things somewhat difficult. Eventually, she was caught. She was bringing boys 2 or 3 at a time down to the basement, presumably for milk and cookies. And she was given an emergency safety transfer to another school. And I told my boys, I said, look, 25 years ago when I was a student here, I'm sure I would have been online.
Yeah.
But the world, this is about like 1997, 98 or something.
Yeah.
The world is very different now.
Yeah.
Right.
This could mean a bunch of fun followed by a horrible, painful death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know. But I mean, high school, I had ups and downs. I had some hard times. I worked for some very good principals.
Yeah.
I worked for some utterly horrible principals. When I started teaching in the 80s, we still had a union.
Yeah, sure.
UFT has really not functioned as a union for over 20 years. It's a gravy train for a relatively small group of people, and conditions for the teachers in the school get worse and worse.
Yeah.
I mean, the school system under the Bloomberg administration with Joel Klein was basically ripped apart and more or less destroyed.
And that's when all the high schools were broken up into
Yes.
4, 5, 6 high schools, right?
And my last 4 years as a teacher, I was what was known as an ATR. I was at maximum pay scale. Ooh. So we basically, they stripped us of a lot of our seniority.
Yeah.
And they changed us into glorified substitutes.
Uh,
So in 4 years, I was in over 50 different schools.
Mm.
And they'd give you observations with groups of kids you were meeting for the first time. And they
wow.
were claiming, we just want to observe that you adhere to best practices. But they wanted to get rid of you.
Yeah, sure.
And it would be even better if they could do so and somehow fire you and see if you could be stripped of your pension.
Yes.
It was been it. It was really, 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 really horrendous.
Sure. Sure.
It was really horrendous. And of course, the U of T, would express their sympathy.
Yeah.
And
that's about it, huh?
that's about it. They represent you at hearings and so forth, but it was all bullshit.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when I was in CS 61 when I started there. Chapter leader was an old battle axe.
Yeah.
She could have been like a teamster or a longshoreman's shop steward, and she didn't take no mess.
Yeah.
And there was some other good chapter leaders I had. And then I became a chapter. I was a delegate then, chapter leader.
Yeah.
And I've been involved in the opposition within the U of T for many, many years.
Sure.
The latest is that not just they, but many, the city unions are in collusion, and they want to take away Medicare.
That's right.
For the
Medicare
retirees.
Advantage.
Yeah.
Give me a break.
So, and I'm a cancer survivor.
Oh, okay.
I'm a survivor of a very aggressive cancer that had metastasized.
Wow.
And the reason we can have this conversation, one I would imagine would be the hand of Providence.
Sure.
And the other reason would be that I was able to find some of the best doctors, some of the best oncologists, neurologists in New York.
Yeah.
And have that picked up without having to go through, some corporate process.
Yeah.
And, I'm alive.
Not one, but
Not entrepreneur.
Sure.
I'd like to stick around to play with my grandchildren's grandchildren one day.
Yeah.
Which I guess will take a while. But, in the public school system, as I see it, I'm not talking vague conspiracy theories, but the generalized thrust. Well, in the 80s, you had this, 90s, you had this drive. It really took off in Chicago.
Yeah.
Before it took off in New York. And basically, they want to eliminate or privatize public education.
Yeah.
I mean, public education, to the extent that I know, to a large extent, got going because of the efforts of black people after slavery.
That's right. During Reconstruction.
In New York City, the mission and purpose of the public school system is for the majority of the students, is their miseducation and their socialization into uselessness and criminality.
Yeah.
And one of the main ways that this is done, under the guise of some kind of liberal kindness, is by essentially prohibiting discipline.
Yeah.
I mean, my grandchildren go to school in Brazil.
Yeah.
Which at this point does not have great public education, but there's some good schools.
Sure.
But you can't tell a teacher F you.
Yeah.
I mean, there will be consequences.
Yes.
I had to come up with very creative ways of dealing with this. And I was very good at what I did.
Yeah.
I mean, and if F you, I would say, well, wait a minute. Now, you're male, I'm male, and you're talking about this sexual stuff. I don't want to disrespect you, but that's not the way I go. Class, Jose just told us that he likes something a little different, but we're still going to respect him. The class is like rolling on the floor laughing. Jose is screaming at me, "You MF," and, or that request to place a certain appendage in the mouth.
Yeah.
And we're in the lab. Oh, where's the microscope? Or something about some intimate activity with my mother. And I say, "Hey, bro, my mom is 85. Does that turn you on? You must be a stone cold freak." But I couldn't do that today because of the atmosphere that prevails.
Right.
And I taught to the extent that I could. And I also taught general ed sciences. The caliber of people that they brought in, these fresh-faced kids from the Midwest and elsewhere. Some of them are very good.
Yeah.
Many of them, they're too, I tell people, I'm not Albert Einstein, and I'm not a great heroic figure, but I have two things that sustain me. One is common sense and a little bit of backbone.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I run into all these young people that have no backbone and no common sense, and they're trying to tell the older teachers about what to do. And thank God I'm retired.
Yeah.
Thank God I'm retired. So, but now there's a movement, not just retired teachers, but city retirees, and we're fighting. And so far we've won for now against putting us on Medicare Advantage.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Which would be a nightmare.
Yeah.
Of course, I learned many things from my students. I had some wonderful students. I had students who were really screwed up.
Yeah, sure.
God, I never forgive me. A kid. This was at Kennedy High School.
Yeah.
He had just gotten a day or two before out of a psychiatric hospital.
Mm.
He's in my class, and he stands up in the middle class and says, "And I'm a lesbian." So I say, well, I'm a lesbian too. Sit down and shut up. Which I could have gotten into a lot of trouble for these days.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I taught, I did the best I could.
Yeah.
I mean, there was some very good teachers and some mediocre teachers and a couple of horrible teachers. But the myth that's perpetrated is that the reason the kids don't get educated because you have a bunch of racist, incompetent white teachers who are protected by their union.
Yeah.
And that's, pardon my French, that's horseshit.
Yeah.
Do you have some people like that? Yes, you do. That's a very small minority. And all the teachers have to deal with the fact that that their rights as teachers are very limited. They have to deal, the kids are empowered to do things that are really outrageous. So you spend more of your time keeping the class together and maintaining discipline, and it takes much more. You taught for about a semester. Would you?
At global studies in the old Monroe High School, which is divided into 4 high schools.
Yeah, as an ATR, I was in several of the schools there.
Oh.
And yeah, I mean, the other thing is my last couple of years as an ATR, I mean, I was fighting cancer.
Yeah.
I worked every day during radiation.
Wow.
But the so-called ATR field supervisors went after me anyway.
Yeah.
You know, at one point I was thinking, and pistols are somewhat easy to obtain in the Bronx.
Yeah.
Maybe know where to get a silencer, which is a lot more difficult and a lot more expensive. That's a federal offense.
Yeah, sure.
And I had an idea flashing through my mind, but I figured I better not do that because I better hold on for a few more years and then retire, which I did. And there was a buyout. I took advantage of the buyout. And I have a pension. I have Social Security.
Yeah. And
which would have been different if I had done something insane.
Sure. Sure.
And, I knew somebody who could get me a silencer, but I mean, I think that's more time in prison, and it's federal time than illegally, possessing in New York City.
Yeah.
A pistol.
Sure.
Because what are you doing with a silencer? You intend to quietly eliminate somebody.
Yeah.
But I had some wonderful teachers I worked with. I remember at Theodore Roosevelt, we had a circle of teachers who were poets. And, across the street from Roosevelt, one of the side streets across the street, right off next to the Fordham campus, there was a pizza place. I think it was called Pugsley's.
Oh yeah, it's still around. I think.
Yeah.
Last I checked, anyway.
And we would once a month, we would have our poetry sessions there.
Oh wow.
And then Pugsley himself would come in and start playing his saxophone.
Yep. He's still at that. At least a couple years ago, I
God
heard
bless him.
that.
Did you, from your organization, who did I meet? I met Lloyd Oldtown.
Oh, sure.
And then there was a gentleman in the East Bronx, Irish fellow, who passed away, and I forgot his name. Wrote some good books.
Yes. There's even a street named after him now, honorary street. His name I'm blanking on at the moment, but I know exactly who you're talking about. It might come to me.
I haven't met Mark Nyson.
Oh, sure.
Who I went to a summer course with him at Fordham. Unfortunately, we had a really bizarre falling out. Mark has a strange temper at times.
Yeah.
But he's a great scholar and really a great educator.
Sure.
I would certainly like to reconcile with him.
Yeah. Absolutely. So where does the Brazil connection come in, and how long have you
Okay. Do you
been?
remember when the hard hats beat up the anti-war
Yes,
demonstrators?
yes,
It was either 69 or 70.
yeah.
I was there. I was in high school and I was at the demonstrations. And I saw some terrible things that day.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
Yeah.
You know, I had some building tradesmen in my family to see what, you know, I see unionized working people acting as fascists.
Yeah.
Horrified me.
Right.
And where do I find myself some years later? In a hard hat in the shanty on a construction site, listening to some fellas who, in many respects, were very admirable fellas, recount with relish and glee what they had done on that day. And of course, I had to keep my mouth shut.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some years later, I'm in Rio de Janeiro and having my cafezinho, what they call a lanchonete. It was like a combination bar and luncheonette in downtown Rio that was near a large construction site. Mostly, people didn't really come off the site, but one day 2 electricians came in, and I had a little Portuguese from a girlfriend that I had with for a while, but in combination with little Portuguese and Spanish, I communicated with these guys that I had been a unionized building tradesman in New York. And what struck me is that they were not racist and not right wing, and they were very leftist and anti-imperialist and very conscious.
Yeah.
So between meeting these fellows and of course the women, I decided, hey, I got to live in this country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So years later, I actually went on to marry, a brasileira.
Yeah.
And we lived together in New York for a while, and in Brazil. We lived in Bahia in a nice house, and I really preferred that, particularly in winter. I much prefer it,
Sure.
But Co-op City, the Ghanaians have their own organization.
Sure.
And I mean, what brought the Bronx up? Well, one was the Mexicans.
Sure.
They gave tremendous stability.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what really pulled it up were the Africans, the Ghanaians, the people from Senegal and Gambia and Mali, and even some Ethiopians and some other folks. Oh, God bless those people. That was the center of the community from Gambia, and some Gambian students was that building.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
God,
A little more than a year ago now.
that was, and they've really, because their whole thing is kind of very to some extent traditional and structured. The Puerto Ricans are basically disappearing from New York.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Being priced out and.
I mean, the big
Moving
center is Central Florida.
Yeah.
Right.
And another group in the Poconos.
Yeah.
But the big center is Central Florida. I mean, there was always a Puerto Rican barrio in Miami and some folks in Hialeah.
Yeah.
But the big center is the center of the state, which is kind of really changing Florida politics to some extent.
Yeah.
Because these people, like the Broward and Dade County Jewish retirees, are basically Democrats.
Yeah.
And that makes a change in the state's politics, which is still reverberating. And plus, immigration from Puerto Rico during the really bad days to Florida.
Yeah.
I mean, Tony lost a cousin.
Yeah.
Who was the daughter of his extraordinary aunt, Evelina Antonetti,
Yeah. Lori.
who died.
right.
I think there was no power in the hospital.
That's right.
No, lack of saline solution.
Lack of saline solution.
After
And
Maria,
also-
right?
Wonderful, wonderful woman.
Yeah.
Lorraine Montenegro.
That's right.
Lori.
Wonderful woman.
Yeah.
So you have a Puerto Rican directly from the island into Central Florida.
Yeah.
The city school system gets worse and worse. beloved, quote unquote, mayor, who did take a heroic stance years ago as a police officer. I believe he was a captain against Bloomberg and stop and frisk. And I believe stop and frisk was intimately related to gentrification.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely. Kind of laid the groundwork for it, even.
Yeah.
Yes.
But now, I mean, once he got into office, I mean, as an assemblyman, president, he became a Bloomberg acolyte.
Yeah.
And in with the real estate developers and the fire people, let's say.
Yeah.
And hey, look, De Blasio had been some kind of genuine leftist as a younger man. Matter of fact, he and his wife did their honeymoon in Cuba. Giuliani, as the U.S. attorney, was the most effective. I mean, he broke the back of the mafia.
Yeah.
He was the most effective prosecutor. And Ed Koch had been a very, very liberal congressman, so much to the extent that he introduced legislation which passed both houses of Congress prohibiting U.S. arms or police, military or police assistance to the fascist dictatorship in Uruguay. And that raised the ire of the Uruguayan regime. But they didn't have the setup. The setup. They wanted to kill him. So what they did was they contracted that out to Pinochet's secret police, the DINA. And it was difficult for them. Look, I mean, for a foreign government to kill a federal United States congressman in Washington or New York, that's, that's like opening a can of worms. And they, hemmed and hawed and hesitated. And the FBI eventually informed Koch that he was on this death list about a year after they knew that it existed. And Koch became a horror as mayor, and so did Giuliani and Bloomberg. Actually, Abe Bean, who I met in Co-op City, even after he was out of office, he was looking for a place to eat, and I directed him to old Moishe's Deli, which had good food.
Yeah.
Not around anymore. Abe Bean, old-time Tammany hack.
Yeah.
Fought against the bankers.
Yeah.
Played a heroic role.
Yeah.
Stood up to them. They saw to it that he would be a one-term mayor, but Koch knew what bandwagon to jump on immediately.
Yeah.
This is what I mean. Look, that you could have this here is an amazing thing. That people could have consciousness of the Bronx and its history.
Yes.
And this can exist in the middle of this whole block. Montefiore ran out the people.
That's right.
Who are basically private homeowners.
That's right. Yeah.
They ran them out, and part of the gentrification slated for the East Bronx. It's not like they're gentrifying Harlem or the South Bronx. Is also directed against private homeowners.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the one thing that probably protects Co-op City to some extent is that it's such a solid voting bloc.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yes.
And there was attempts to privatize Co-op City, and people had the sense, this is not Manhattan.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get $500,000. I'm going to get a little okie doke, but then where do I go to live?
Yeah.
They'll raise the rent here to something impossible.
Yeah.
So the schools, there's like a small network of like boutique public schools that are there to service the children of gentrification.
Yeah.
New York City is now the most segregated public school system in the United States. You don't have to go to Alabama.
That's right. It's right here.
and you don't have to go to Georgia. And not only that, you can get good peach cobbler in Brooklyn. So even less reason to go to Georgia. Atlanta is filled up with black ex-New Yorkers.
Yeah. That's right.
And it's like the sort of like the mobile African American diaspora.
That's right.
I can put it.
That's right.
And of course, New York City. Much of the black population, non-Latino black population, is West Indian and increasingly African.
Yeah.
Yes.
Much of the Jewish population is now in Brooklyn and somewhat in Queens, Hasidim and Haredim, very ultra-Orthodox Jews. Though you do have this immigrant community of Uzbekis and Bukharans in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you have some of the Russians are in Riverdale, scattered about elsewhere. And they push to the suburbs.
Yeah.
The Bukharans seem to stay, in their community, and bakeries or restaurants with traditional clay ovens. And
Wow.
wonderful food. Wonderful food, and when their kids get bullied, let's say there's a rather sharp response, or a sharp and painful response, so people know not to bother them.
Yeah.
And the Italians left.
Yeah.
The Irish left. There was this revival in the 70s and the 80s around here.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But that's over. They're gone.
Yeah.
They're gone.
If you walk down Bainbridge, you can still see some remnants of the old Irish pubs, but
Yeah.
they're not Irish pubs anymore, of
No.
course. But the outside, you can still see
No.
remains of
I'm
that.
still Irish. They were up above Woodlawn.
Yeah.
There are ethnic communities. In Queens, you have like Astoria. There's a lot of Brazilians.
Mm.
A lot of like Arthur Avenue. Most of the store owners are mainly still Italians. Restaurant owners, except for Title Brothers. Title.
Oh, sure. Title. Yeah.
But most of the white people in Arthur Avenue are either Albanians.
That's right.
Or Bosnian Muslims.
Yeah.
And you can hear the call to prayer from the mosque.
Yeah.
Which is like almost surreal when I remember the neighborhood years ago.
Yeah. Sure.
When black people could not walk through the neighborhood.
Yep. I've heard stories of the Italians tipping buses over.
Oh
that
yes.
had black
Oh
folks on
yes.
them. Yep.
They had to discontinue. The bus route.
Yeah.
No, his bus was actually the 12 in the Bronxdale.
Yeah.
But there was actually a bus going up and down Arthur Avenue.
Yeah.
And there was some, nasty. They had to discontinue that route.
Yeah.
And now I hear the adhan, I hear the call to prayer, and that's New York is all these paradoxes.
Yeah.
But it's just increasingly unlivable.
Yeah.
Because who can afford it?
I know.
Yes.
I mean, with gentrification, you have and they're moving on to projects.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And the projects already have families, 2 or 3 families who've been displaced from Harlem or elsewhere,
Right.
in one apartment.
Yeah.
And you have the very interesting the immigrant communities in Queens and Brooklyn, huge Haitian.
Sure.
As a matter of fact, they've made one of the lakes in Prospect Park a sacred place where they do their ceremonies.
Wow.
Yes.
But everybody's getting pushed out because you can't pay the rent, and your work doesn't pay enough, for, for you to live without working 2 or 3 jobs.
Yeah.
And that's New York, but it's also the United States at this point.
Yeah, that's right.
Where you have half or more of the population living in poverty, many, many people living in real destitution.
Yeah.
Unless there's some type of change in consciousness, I don't like what I think I see coming down the pike here.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to get Brazilian citizenship.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the reasons I'm here now is the whole process known as in terms of getting my residency, the equivalent of a green card, a process called apostelação, apostillation. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
No.
Well, there's a whole group of documents, and in the past, one of the things I needed was a certificate of good conduct from the New York City Police.
Oh, okay.
And they have an office that just does that.
Oh, wow.
Down in Police Plaza. But they closed. That office was closed for quite a while due to COVID.
Yeah.
Then I contacted Albany and the state police, and I contacted the FBI in Washington. I was not able to get that paperwork. And finally, I got the paperwork. And I get with all the various documents. And I get to Brazil, and I bring the immigration is handled by the federal police.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so we bring the documents to them and say, no, you have to take this to the consulate to be validated.
Yes.
And that starts like over 3 months at the consulate in Salvador Bahia. They don't answer the door, they don't answer the buzzer, they don't answer the phone. We're calling, sending them email, writing to them, and to other consulates in Recife and Rio and Sao Paulo, and to the embassy in Brasilia, the capital.
Yeah.
Finally, after 3 months, we get an email from the consulate in Recife stating that I have to bring my documents to the U.S. consulate in New York, which is wait a minute. And the United States does not have consulates in the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The United States does not have an American embassy in Washington, D.C. It has a White House.
Yeah.
And finally, I met a young lawyer, and she said, no, you're going to have to bring the documents to the Brazilian consulate in New York, and they will validate it, this process known as apostillation.
Yes.
And when I got back to New York, I was very sick for a couple weeks, and I got back. Change in climate.
Yeah.
Really sick. Thugs can't understand that.
Yeah.
I mean, down the block from me, an armed robber tried to take off a somewhat older gentleman, short and paunchy and bald. But it turned out that he was an off-duty detective, and he got the drop on him, and he blew him away.
Wow.
Which, again, people were not too terribly upset about. Yeah. He unfortunately had to do hours of paperwork, but that seems to be universal.
Yeah.
But they don't understand this. Hey, look, this is a very strange place. Yeah. And there are people doing some very good things around the country. Things with food, things with housing, some wonderful things, or even this. But I don't think it's sufficient, because the consciousness of the majority of people is really, it's like they're lost in ignorance, and then like a malevolent, not just a delusion, a malevolent delusion.
Yeah.
and I don't know any I don't know a solution. You know, I wish I could be more optimistic, but it's hard to you know to see grounds for a lot of optimism here.
Yeah.
You know, in the United States for 30 years the world was unipolar, and now with with the reemergence of Russia and the rise of China, this place doesn't stand a chance. Do you think Americans can compete with the Chinese? They have discipline. They're well educated, and they have they have many very terrible drawbacks, and I've been there more than once, and I was married to a Chinese woman, but they have a 3,000-year-old culture that on many levels helps to sustain them. Here, what's culture here? What TikTok, whatever's Facebook. What really harmed my grandsons was during the lockdown in Brazil. The schools were closed, and they began instead of going to school and playing a whole lot of football and studying capoeira and playing. Well, they kept on playing drums. They spent huge amounts of times on their phones.
Mm.
Can lead to a process of brain death. Now we're pulling them out of that.
Yeah.
While we had to take away the phones. At in school, look, the majority of kids want to accomplish something. They want to do something. But who sets the tone? Is it them, whether it's smart kids? No, it's the antisocial screw-ups. And the teacher has, discipline is essentially prohibited. So a whole generation of generation are destroyed. And that's why I was self-educated, because I was a terrible student. Matter of fact, in third grade, my behavior was terrible. My parents and my mother were an immigrant in this, let's say they were chancleta-related types of disciplinary actions. But the school sent me to a school psychologist, and he gave me an IQ test. He has several named Rorschach,
yeah,
and the old Stanford Binet IQ test, which had a category known as borderline, which was below low normal and a little bit above moderately retarded. And I told my mother I was borderline, but they felt that I was somewhat south of the border. So therefore, I'm the first certified mentally retarded person to be a licensed New York City school teacher.
Wow.
And I've had some kids call me an effing retard. And my response to that was, "You right, I'm slow." Things, again, I couldn't do that today. I would get into trouble.
Yeah.
But I handled, I was able to handle kids that most people couldn't handle.
Yeah.
I mean, I had some kids who were, matter of fact, in Theodore Roosevelt, I had a situation where I had these kids who sort of were in and out of Rikers, but they loved me.
Yeah.
I mean, when they came to class, they didn't really do any work. But if I was having problems with other kids, without me saying a word, they were my enforcers. Very discreet, and would do things in stairwells, and they really liked me. So that was a good, that was a good thing. Something you don't learn in grad school.
For sure. So why don't you talk a little bit about where you think the Bronx itself might be heading in the next, decade or so, with the various factors that are at play right
I
now.
mean, I think and certainly hope Co-op City will survive. But what I see in the Bronx, and I wish I could be more optimistic, but I see massive gentrification,
Yeah,
and which will, among other things, destroy the character of the Bronx as the Bronx.
yeah,
Uh, I I don't know what's going to happen in this country. I think things might be very well be headed in really in some type of form of fascism.
yeah,
Uh, I thank God I got a place to go to.
yeah,
But to see what was a great city, culture, and people, and human beings, and children screwed around with in this manner, and to see children deprived of an education. I mean, there are very bright kids that do rise to the top. Uh, Charter schools, and some of them are not that bad, but it's a scam.
yeah,
That's a scam. Adams and Banks are very much advocates of charter schools. Uh, During my ATR period, I spent a week or two in what was at one time the flagship of Banks's Eagle Academy group
mm.
on Third Avenue. Are you familiar with that? That's
Oh, yes, 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 yes.
and it was smoke and mirrors. It was really disordered, and kids, the kids after the kids came in with uniforms, which they enforced, but they ran in the hallways. It was not a good situation.
Yeah,
Uh, there's some wonderful people doing things with food. Some people in Soundview in the South Bronx. Unfortunately, Majora Carter turned out to be a bust.
yeah,
She was cute though. uh, but, I just and then these fresh-faced newcomers, a lot, not all of them, but a bunch of them that are particularly as teachers have sort of like a nasty arrogance towards
yeah,
them.
yeah,
That doesn't sit very well with me.
yeah,
But, by everybody, your neighbors are in and out of your house, and you're having your cafezinho 3 times a day, and you're certainly not lonely.
yeah,
Um, And the South Bronx many years ago was like that also.
Oh yeah. Café a las 3.
Yeah. And amongst my grandparents' set is old countrified Yiddishy working people.
yeah.
Well, their thing was more tea,
Sure, sure.
which they would drink. They would put a sugar cube in their teeth and sip the tea through the sugar cube. They call that papusta. And there was this human warmth and community, and it existed in Co-op City,
Yeah,
but it exists now. I must say,
yeah,
it does exist now. It existed in the old Jewish Co-op City, these transplanted communities, but it exists now in the African American and Latino and West Indian and African, particularly more and more in the African communities in Co-op City. People look after their neighbors, people look after everybody else's kids, and that's a good thing.
yeah,
The schools in Co-op City are not good.
Yeah.
But that's New York City's schools.
sure.
That's New York City schools. So parents are sold on that the only way my kids are going to get a decent education is going to be in a charter school. Because the charter schools can do one thing. Kid acts up, he's out. They don't want special ed kids. They don't want kids, ELL, ELL kids.
Yeah.
That's, that's left to the public schools, who are increasingly being harmed, not by the kids, but by the Department of Education and by the government. So,
Sure.
what else?
So I guess
Still Orchard Beach.
Yeah, there's still Orchard Beach. That's
And,
right.
which is not terribly clean, but I can go there in summer and look at all these women in their bikinis, and and as my senior citizen genes begin to respond somewhat, there's the museums and art galleries. There are artists.
Sure.
Because up until recently, Bronx was the only place that you could still afford rent.
Yeah.
Brooklyn is long gone. I mean, my wife, there was a ceramics group in Co-op City, which my wife was not so much a ceramicist as my wife is a sculptor. She sculpts in ceramic and in wood and a little bit in stone. She was studying metal, and she paints. And she was a protege of the great Brazilian artist Mario Cravo. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He was that group of people in Bahia around Jorge Amado and Caribe and that group of writers and artists. And my wife was and so she came into and she came into the ceramics group, and here you had it's like Pablo Picasso walking into a neighborhood painting club.
Yeah.
And women were studying with her, and she was putting out tremendous things. And then the one who was the president of the club, she engineered like a coup d'etat, and they closed the club and gave everything away. It was really horrible. That had been there from the beginning of Co-op City.
Wow.
But Co-op City still, has art groups. It has many, many, many good things.
Sure.
Really good programs for senior citizens. Since I don't want to eat out all the time or cook too much pasta or too much rice, a lot of times during the week I eat the senior citizens lunch in the community center.
Yeah.
For $2.
Oh wow.
Okay.
Which some days is actually fairly decent.
Sure.
I like Co-op City, but I like Bahia better.
Absolutely.
But I'll keep my apartment. I will spend some time of the year here in Co-op City.
Sure.
I wish something could be done for the schools, but parents get pushed into is not these public schools are horrible and they're never going to get any better. They're only going to get worse. So let's put your child in a charter school. In charter school, they get these kids who are not. Some of them become good teachers. Most of them are not.
Yeah.
Well, they don't have. There's no union, and a lot of money is being made through public funds. It's an enormous scam. I wish I could be more encouraging.
Sure. So, looking back on the Bronx that you knew, and of course, plenty of, in some aspects, of course, still exist. What does that Bronx represent to you?
It represents viable, decent working class communities. The one flaw, and serious flaw, in particularly in talking about the Jewish communities of the West Bronx, was not so much the racism per se of the community per se, but the racism of the landlords.
Mm.
That a black accountant or an attorney could not get an apartment there.
Yeah.
But then later, when they decided to break it up, they'd give away apartments to highly dysfunctional welfare families with the intent of driving all the folks out. This was done very much in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And in other places in the city and around the United States. And that was the flaw. I mean, the flaw in many of the old AFL skilled unions, building trades union, was the racism.
Yeah.
I mean, here you had people coming up from the Caribbean, from Jamaica, and Trinidad, Barbados, who had where they have extremely good vocational education.
Yeah.
And they could not get into the unions.
Yeah.
And now, like more than half of New York City construction, including high-rise construction, is non-union.
Mm-hmm.
People are constantly getting injured and killed. Look, as an apprentice plumber, I remember on the Iranian office building, it was diagonally across the street from the cathedral, an open building. I'm in a shaftway, like 30 stories up, and we're running risers. We're running, pipe, and I'm on an I-beam in the shaftway, and like a complete. I had my hard hat on, but like a complete idiot. I don't have on a harness, or. And the shop steward saw me and told me, "You stupid MF," and a couple other terms of endearment. If I ever catch you doing that again, I'm going to kick the crap out of you. And he was absolutely right.
Yeah, sure.
I was doing something incredibly stupid. Something could have come down the shaftway, or I could have lost balance.
Yeah.
That doesn't go on anymore.
Yeah.
That doesn't go on anymore. And you'll see sometimes I can work as in high-rise sort of situations. No hard hat. No safety. There's no union. I was apprentice. One day every other week, instead of going to work, we went to school.
Yeah.
And I learned blueprint reading and how to weld. What I wanted to learn, if I had stayed doing that, was pneumatic controls.
Mm.
I went in another direction, become a really disgraceful profession, a degraded and disgraceful profession, a New York City teacher. I mean, I might have been better off as a pimp or a drug dealer, but I don't know if you get a pension for that. Maybe a 401k. There's no medical plan and you get sick days.
Yeah.
But I had a granduncle, my father's uncle, who was a mob guy.
Mm.
He was a mob guy. He started on the street and landed up in he was also a boxer, he was a club fighter. Little guy, flyweight. And he landed up in Sing Sing for a while. Got to a swing out with another prisoner.
Mm.
Got punched in the chest, snapped a rib, pierced the lung. The lung became infected and he lost the lung.
Wow.
But, he stand up and kept his mouth shut. And he had a good head for figures. So when he got out, they apprenticed him to a bookmaker. And he worked book under a man named Frank Erickson. Frank Erickson was Meyer Lansky's main bookmaking person.
Hmm.
He wasn't Jewish, Frank Erickson, but Meyer Lansky, I guess, was an equal opportunity employer and respected ability. And but Max, my grandmother, also was very much involved with the Teamsters Union and with vending machines
Okay, yeah,
and and you know where that's all, you know.
of course.
And I remember at his funeral, somebody from the Teamsters spoke. You know, Max Parker was a loyal Union brother. But look, when I was 15, I got caught in a stolen car. And I actually knew Max's phone number. And I had an opportunity to make a phone call. I figured if I call my father, he would go ballistic.
Yeah.
And then he would call Max.
Yeah.
So I figured, let me skip the drama. And I called Max directly and made some calls. And a couple hours I was out of there clean. Clean.
Wow.
And he sat me down. He told me, this is not for you. You're not some half-starved immigrant. Go to school, get an education, or get a good trade. Be an electrician, be a plumber. But not, you know, not this. And always had like a sort of almost like a Brooks Brothers suit. He dressed fairly conservative, very well, not flashy.
Yeah.
And I guess his one weakness for flash is every year he had a new caddy. That was a big deal back then. See me in the street and give me a silver dollar or, you know, pat my head. And Max helped some other people in the family who gotten into rather serious predicaments.
Sure.
Again, it's another time, it's another generation. Obviously, Max, you know, as a bookie, he had his buddy who was the Shylock, so people could get the money to gamble. And I knew Max and the Shylock's buddy, who was the strong arm guy, who, you know, if you didn't pay up.
Yeah.
You know, on one hand, Max took care of people. I mean, you didn't have to be Jewish, you know, people that need a couple of bucks for their rent or for bail.
Yeah.
That old school, you know, type of thing.
Sure.
Which I don't think you really see anymore.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
One thing, getting back to Co-op City, on Gun Hill Road, there was a very, very good pizza place called Marcello's. Down the block from the station, there's a decent pizza place there called Nick's. But Marcello's is much better, and old man Marcello would cook food in the back. And near the 5 train station, there was a number hole. And it was run by this old mob guy. And he would have lunch every day in Marcello's. And Marcello would cook up some really good food for him. And one day, it was Gun Hill Road, I guess, paralleling Fordham Road. There was a couple of French tourists who they were looking for the Bronx Zoo. And this old mob guy is sitting down, you know, and he was quite fluent in French. He had lived in Marseille for a while, worked on the docks or something, and actually spoke a good, and he was talking to them. Yeah, Marcello, and Marcello brings out a whole feed for them and wine. And this was like sort of a scene out of the old Bronx.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't see that anymore.
Wow.
Yeah. And I missed the food at the Patriot Tavern.
Where was the Patriot Tavern?
Was it 115th or 116th? No, it was 116th.
There was also
First.
Delightful Cafe on
Yes.
16th and 1st.
Yeah.
The old mafiosos would stop there.
Yeah, and the food was good.
Yeah.
And then there was this very good Puerto Rican restaurant on 3rd Avenue, Del Pueblo.
El Pueblo, sí, chico.
And
Yeah, El Pueblo. Yeah.
the jettisoning of food, and I don't mean quote unquote artisan food,
Yeah.
because these old bakeries and old butcher shops were artisan.
Yeah.
Highly,
That's right.
and that jettisoning of life, let's say life-sustaining working class culture, makes New York a cold and bitter place.
Yeah. Yep. I know.
This block was all families, and they just ran them out.
Yeah.
I mean, Montefiore has a lot of space. They didn't have to grab this.
Yeah. I know. Caddy corner from here is literally the real estate development wing of Montefiore.
Yeah.
So,
Montefiore took over Einstein
Yeah.
and Westchester Square Hospital, which is no longer has an emergency room, is no longer a hospital.
Yeah.
What happened to Einstein? There was a time when Einstein was at a level, let's say, with Columbia Presbyterian or Mount Sinai was one of the best hospitals in the city, and it was the teaching hospital for the Einstein School of Medicine. And one of the big victims of Bernie Madoff was Yeshiva University.
Yeah.
And that community fields then of wealthier Jews. That was big, lost a lot. And Yeshiva had to jettison the medical school and jettison, I think the medical school might be connected to them still somewhat.
Yeah.
And they had to jettison Einstein Hospital.
Yeah.
It's just the entire quality of life here plummets. You have any suggestions? Thank God there's this place because it documents the Bronx and what it was and what remains, and maybe that go with some people to say, hey, we're not going to let you take everything away from us.
Yeah.
All different ethnic communities. A lot of Filipinos.
Yeah.
Bellman Parkway and up there. A lot of Pinoy, a lot of Filipinos, and I've spent a bunch of time in the Philippines. My brother lives there.
Yeah.
Smaller communities. Well, of course, there's the Albanians and the Muslim community. There's some small community of Ethiopians. And there's Laotians and the Koreans are gone. I mean, there's stores, but there was a Korean block.
Yeah.
With a very good Korean restaurant and a Korean church, stores. That's gone.
What block was that? If
It
you
was
remember.
like, what was it? Concourse? Was it 202nd? I forget which.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Off the concourse.
I see.
There's still a Cambodian Buddhist temple and
Yeah.
monastery.
Yeah.
There was also a Thai vihara,
Oh.
and a Chinese one,
Sure.
and I believe a maybe possibly a Laotian one, but that's basically gone.
Yeah.
Vietnamese one, there's the Mexicanos, there's the Dominicans, there's the Africans. A little Irish left north here in Woodlawn. There's some Italians when you go further out in Throgs Neck.
Oh yeah. Sure.
There's a little Jewish in Riverdale.
Yeah.
Some Russians up there. A tiny little bit of like the Kingsbridge community. That all Irish.
Yeah.
Because I taught at Kennedy for a while.
Sure.
One day we were planning to do a union activity. We were going to walk to Michael Quill's house and sing Solidarity Forever outside Michael Quill's house.
Sure.
He was a great man.
Sure. Absolutely.
He
Yeah.
was a great man. Among other things, Michael Quill's responsible. Well, blacks could only in the New York City train system be porters or cleaners,
That's right.
and they would not hire Jews.
Yeah.
And Michael Quill saw to it that both of those things changed. In the Irish communities, you had an older, largely immigrant, not only immigrant, IRA remnant,
Sure.
who were extremely pissed off at the conservative and right-wing direction Irish Americans were heading. I mean, my uncle Ezra, the carpenter, he married an Irish American woman. And after they lived in a house, an old house I told you about, where the Lincoln House was now.
Yeah.
After the older folks died, I stayed there for a while. Their bachelor uncle Patty, an old IRA guy, who then got to New York, and he was involved, with Michael Quill in the founding of the TWU, and he really liked me, and he would get people freaked out because the neighborhood over there was still Democratic,
Yeah.
and still very pro-labor, but unfortunately very racist, and starting to head towards the right. When John F. Kennedy was killed, that was the end of their anchor.
Yeah.
But he would freak people out because he never married, read the Daily News, read other things too, went to mass on Sunday, and went to the bar that served the stout on tap, and he would say things that would freak the shit out, freak people out. He's like, "Oh, that Mr. Castro, he's a good man."
Yeah.
And people were freaked, but it's like I'm sounding depressing. It's almost like my political mentor was a gentleman named Carl Cow, who was from Duluth, Minnesota, one town over from Bob Dylan's hometown, which was Hibbing. And immigrant parents, and his father was a tabaquero, was working, and had his old time fashion, had the lector, had the reader.
Sure.
And Carl started out as a wobbly, and then he in the Communist Party and the Trotskyist Party and this and that. And then he broke with them, merchant seaman.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot of things from him, a tremendous amount of things from him. And he told me he was at a meeting, and he was already Communist Party.
Yeah.
And Big Bill Haywood, famous Big Bill Haywood, was a pretty huge guy.
Yeah.
Miner and actually cowboy, was making a speech. He was pounding the table to emphasize a point, and the table collapsed. And so I told a friend of mine about that, who was, involved very politically in the opposition to UFT, and working class Italian from the Bronx and Staten Island, and he told me, "No, you're the missing link." My cousin Walter, out in Northern California, my first cousin Susan married they were on that huge hippie farm thing in Tennessee. You ever heard of the farm? Stephen.
I think I've heard of it. I don't know much about it.
They were there for a number. They met there, and she married a fellow from Minnesota, of French descent, and he tells me that he goes home for visits, and his area, the furthest thing to the right was in Minnesota, the Democratic Party is called the Farmer Labor Party.
Yeah.
That was the furthest to the right in that area.
Yeah.
He says, now it's all Trumpers.
I know.
He says, I don't know what happened. So a communist stronghold because of the metal miners.
That's right.
Before that, the Wobblies and the lumberjacks were Wobblies and the metal miners.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier about my uncle, the carpenter,
Yeah.
union carpenter. My mother's younger brother, the only one that was born in this country. And he's going, and when the Bronx was burning, I told him, well, the landlords are burning the buildings for the insurance money. And that infuriated him. No, it's because the animals that live there are partying and setting their buildings on fire for fun. I was like, this disgusting racist stupidity, you couldn't use soul on it.
Yeah.
In many other respects, he was the nicest guy in the world. Master mechanic as a carpenter, craftsman extraordinary.
Yeah.
Before that, he was an automobile mechanic. He was in the first graduating class from Aviation Trades High School.
Mm.
And then in the service, Army of Occupation, he was running a garage, a repair garage in Japan, and all Japanese mechanics. He said they were the best mechanics he ever saw in his life, and he really learned a lot from them.
Mm.
I mean, I just wish I wish I could convince people, and I mean, maybe to some extent I may have convinced some of my students. I mean, I remember Roosevelt had a couple of kids. They were heavy metal kids.
Yeah.
And I told them, look, listen to this. This is Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
Then, a couple of years after that, Roosevelt, one of my old students was a real screw up. And he said, oh man, I'm still listening to that thing you turned me on to. And he was listening to Bird.
Wow.
And back at Kennedy, I was in the hip hop days, and I listened to some hip hop.
Sure.
I remember, I might be old, I'm not too bright, but my flow is funky and my rhyme is high, but as a musician, I didn't like rap. And some things, but in terms there was a wonderful rap group in the South Bronx, and they came to the South Bronx from Chicago. They were Chicago Chicanos.
Oh
And
yeah.
I forget their name.
It's
Rebel Diaz.
Rebel Diaz. That's
Rebel
it. Rebel
Diaz.
Diaz. That's
Yeah.
right.
Very politically astute too.
Yeah.
But look, I remember back at this was at Roosevelt. I was playing some of these kids. I was playing Benny Morey, Que Bueno Baila Usted, incredible percussion.
Yeah.
And the kids could put the rap down for a minute and get turned on
Yeah.
from this.
Sure.
Years later, at Kennedy, the kids were too far gone.
Mm.
They were too far gone. They couldn't, But I even saw, in my ATR days, I saw some of the African kids, to hip hop kind of music, making some dance moves that came out of traditional African stuff. And I would tell them that we would dance, and sometimes the drummer the conguero would be looking at us, and he'd make a change up in the rhythm. Instead of the tumbao, and the hip dancers would change their dance moves.
Yeah.
And then he would pick up off of what they were doing, and I told them, some of the dance moves you're doing are very, very hip.
Yeah.
but the music is fixed. You can't change that. You can't change that. And you don't have that interaction between the musicians, and particularly the drummers, the percussionists, and the dancers. And some of these great musicians, Tito Puente, by the way, was a dancer.
Mm.
Eddie Palmieri, I don't know if he was a dancer, but he was a timbalero.
Oh, indeed.
Tito Rodriguez was a dancer
Yes, sir.
and a timbalero. And some Roberto Roena.
Oh, tremendous dance. Mambo Aces.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so there was this very African thing. It was this relationship, between the drummers. But even we say the percussionist, but in a sense the piano is a percussionist also.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And maybe the bass player.
Sure.
Vibes too.
Oh God, vibes. God, I miss Pucci.
Yeah. Steve.
We had a very good friend. I went to high school with him. You didn't go to high school with him.
Real good.
Steve Pucci. You don't want me to make funny faces in the camp. Into the camp or do shadow puppets.
Shadow puppets. Great interview, Al. This is fantastic.
We were speaking about Pucci.
You know him?
No, but please.
Well, Pucci was a very talented musician. He played vibes,
Yeah.
and he worked in some kind of good job, and supported his family, and paid for the house. And he retired, and he started gigging. We would get together, and suddenly he had a heart attack and dropped dead.
Yeah.
And that really sad. I don't think you really didn't know Pucci well.
No, I did.
You did?
We had experiences
Okay.
50 plus years ago with Flaco Millan. And I knew him before he got into music. And I kind of inspired him. I'm not going to take full credit, but at Bard College, I think he met Roswell Rudd.
Ah,
And that just turned him.
I knew Roswell Rudd.
A fantastic musician.
Just
He
a
did a
genius.
Hibaro jazz deal. Roswell hooked up with the Jibaros de Puerto Rico and did a jazz Jibaro thing. But Pucci, inspired by him and listening to Cal Jader, the rest is history. And he morphed into an excellent vibraphone.
And then he.
I played a gig with him when he just started out because he lived in Trout's Neck. In private
Yeah.
houses.
That's where the guy from Cathedral came from.
Aye.
On Schley Avenue.
Oh my God. Yeah, we're going back 50 plus years.
But that was a great band.
Yeah.
I mean, you and Paul were in Co-op City, and Marty Ross was.
Oh, my goodness.
But the rest of the band was from those projects.
Mm.
Al Diaz, Mike Cassiano,
Oh, my goodness.
Wow.
But
Well, Al, I think in the interest of time, so we can make sure to feed you before you leave. We should probably wrap it up here.
okay.
But could easily keep going. I know. But we can always record more.
Sure.
If we need to. So yeah, you want to just maybe share another 30 seconds, minute or so wrap up. Whatever you'd like to share.
This documentation of the Bronx and its people and its history and their culture and music and so forth gives some slight hope that it may absorb into people's consciousness, and they might start thinking, hey, we don't have to do it this way.
Yeah.
That's my hope.
Yeah.
So my hands up, my applause to you folks. God bless you.
Thank you, Al. Thank you so much. And thank you, Baba Tony.
Of course. Of course.
Okay.
My pleasure.